us to write all of the guiding stuff and kind of got us going. She came up with a lot of our templates for scoring and really, I thought, just got us off the ground. So we're thrilled to have her back. And now that Tim is here, Tim, I know that you had a lot to do with getting Sherilyn on board in a timely way, and we really appreciate that as well. Because this is, I mean, we've got a window here. It's not as long. It's getting shorter all the time. And so getting this going is really important. So anyway, I did get an email from Sristi, who is not going to be able to join us. She's on vacation, having fun somewhere. So with that, I welcome Sherilyn. And I told everyone that I had dinner with Mark and Moret, had a great time in Sisters. What a cool town. Had a really nice time talking with them. That was a highlight of my month so far. So Mark Stern, you're always doing something cool. What you been up to?
Well, I also got to spend a little bit of time in Sisters, and one of the fun things was Jenny and I went and heard Moret give a presentation at the Sisters Trail Alliance about the White's Creek effort and project there that she and many others have been involved in over the last 10 plus years, dating back to when Moret worked for the Forest Service there. And it was both really interesting, really well presented, and just one of the best talks I think I've heard in a really long time. But it really gave a sense of the history of White's Creek and what it had been in that community as part of that community, and the name change process and how it landed where it was today. And it was just really informative, enjoyable, and really well presented. She did an awesome job on it, and it was really fun to see that and hear about it, because Jenny and I had been out to that viewpoint several different times, and it always remarked how well done it was, including it has some short essays by some of the school kids from Sisters, which also give it a whole different flavor to the history of that landscape there. So it's pretty neat. Also heard about one canyon called Cougar Canyon, which definitely gave you a sense of what to be aware of if you went up in that direction as well. So it was a great job that Moret did there.
Well, Moret, that's as both of us got to see you. That's pretty nice. It would be great for us all to be able to get together like that. But what's been going on for you, Moret?
Well, it was really fun to see Mark Stern in person in 3D, and his lovely wife Jenny, and they were both very kind and fun to hang out with. And then I got to see you, Carl, and Mark. That was super fun. And then the rest of my month has been kind of weird, because soon after I got COVID, and I'm in day 9 right now of my 10-day quarantine. A lot of people in Sisters are coming down with COVID, but it's been after 3 years of testing and being so careful, because I teach yoga to older ladies at an assisted living as well. And I don't know where I got it, but it wasn't too bad. And I'm on day 9. So as of tomorrow, it's my last day of quarantine. I should be able to re-enter the world, but happy to Zoom with you today. Viruses are excluded. So thank you.
Yeah, that's one advantage to Zoom. Well,
Yep.
Moret, I'm sorry to hear that happened, but I'm glad you're feeling good and can get through it all. And oh my gosh, it's still around. I don't even want to think about it. Mark Labhart.
Hello, folks. Well, let's see our report. First of all, let's talk about the beer, Carl. So we were at an OWEB meeting, a board meeting, and Carl wanted to get together with Merritt and Eliza Jane and myself. So we figured out a way to do that while he was at this OWEB board meeting that night. And I was trying to tell him he could not buy me a beer because of the ethics things. I'm pretty strict about that, and I almost had to fight him at the table. Finally, he said, "I'm buying you a beer. I don't care what you do." So anyway, probably got an ethics violation. Well, I think it's over $50, but anyway, he bought me a beer. So, so now that's all public. So in case you guys are wondering what happened there, but Merritt and Carl and I had a nice discussion. And we did, the OWEB board had a tour of White's Creek and got to see some of the new work that's going on there in terms of habitat improvements on that portion of White's Creek. And then we got to look through the smoke upstream and looked at some of the work that has been accomplished already. And you can already see from a distance anyway, how much the project has improved in that specific area of White's Creek in terms of habitat for fisheries and wildlife. So it's pretty cool. So we talked about commission meeting was on Friday. It was one of the longer commission meetings that we've had. It was almost a 12-hour, well, it was a 12-hour meeting. We started at 8 and we shut her down at 8 o'clock at night. So it was a long meeting. Lots of pretty important issues that were discussed. I did talk to Mark Stern about his representation on the Private Forest Accord Committee. We were dealing with the administrative rules with that and how that's going to move into the funding process. And there's $10 million allocated per year, 20 million for biennium for projects that are going to go on the ground with that. And I wanted to make sure that Mark Stern was okay with the rules that were in there. And so he felt pretty comfortable about it. And the rest of the Private Forest Accord folks that testified felt fairly comfortable with that. So we moved forward on the Private Forest Accord administrative rules. Then also at the commission meeting, we talked about whales. There's a press release that's out right now on whale entanglements. We're trying to reduce the number of whale entanglements off of our coastline. And of course, Washington and California are doing the same thing. But we put in place a couple years ago some restrictions on the crabbing industry to see if this would work to help reduce whale entanglements. It's been in place for about 2 years now. And the commission was pretty unanimous that we just don't know with these restrictions that we put in place, whether they need to be further restricted, keep the same, or eliminated. But we decided to keep them the same and to go for another 2-year period and have a review at the end of a 2-year period. They're in place, but we're going to review it in 2 years. Let me rephrase it that way. And so we want to, whale entanglements this year have been 0 off the Oregon coast, which is good news. So we're going to see how that goes. So there was testimony from the crabbing industry and Oceana and a couple other groups about where we should go. But the commission was pretty clear that they wanted to stay the course on that. So if you have any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer that. Spent quite a bit of time talking about, we have 4 memorandum of agreements with Oregon tribes. And for those of you who don't know, there's 9 Oregon tribes. Federally recognized tribes, and 4 of those have already got memorandum of agreements for ceremonial fishing and hunting in tribal historic areas. So the Grand Ronde tribe was asking for a memorandum of agreement. And so we had a lot of discussion with them, the public and other tribes about that MOA. And the end result was the commission voted 4-3 to approve the MOA with the Grand Ronde tribe. So now we have 5 memorandum of agreements with tribes. Hopefully we can get the rest of the tribes to do the same thing. I'm a big proponent of these MOAs because we have for a lot of years now how we've treated tribes historically, and then being able for them to do ceremonial hunting and fishing in coordination with the department and Oregon State Police and reviewing that annually. And so we've put some in place now, and we'll monitor them to see how they're working, but I'm a pretty big proponent of that. We're updating our mule deer plan. We're in the process of doing that right now. It's being done in chapters. So there's various webinars that the Wildlife Division is hosting to roll out a chapter, and then they're presenting that and then getting public comment back on it. So they're moving through that process right now. And then we're just beginning the process of updating our wolf plan. The wolf plan is required to be updated every 5 years. And so we're 2024 is the required time to do the update of the wolf plan. And of course, things have really changed since 5 years ago when they were, the wolves were just starting to introduce themselves. So they're, spreading around the state right now. I've heard that they're on the west side now, up even along some of the coast. They're being observed through cameras. And so we're looking at how we're going to update that wolf plan. And as you may know, there's certain parts of the state that are still under U.S. Fish and Wildlife jurisdiction. And then there's certain parts that are mainly on the east side of Oregon, east of Highway 395, that are under jurisdiction of the department. So the wolf plan is update of the department's responsibilities for the wolves. So lots of interest in the wolf plan, I would say. And so we'll be monitoring that to put in place. I'll close with Jill Zarnowitz, who has been a member of the commission for the 4 years I've been on the commission. She announced at this meeting she was not going to seek reappointment for another term. And so she said this would be her last meeting. Nothing wrong. She's just, they've got a winery that's taken a lot of work. She thanked the commission for the 4 years that she served, but she said she just doesn't have the time commitment to put in for the commission. And for some of you that are, follow the commission, it's a lot of work. It isn't just a meeting once a month. There's a lot of homework that you have to do, discussing with folks about different things. And so she chose not to re-up. So that position is vacant right now. And so the other thing I would say, and let's see, Sarah's on, so she'll correct me, and Michelle's on, I think. So she'll correct me if I get this wrong, but there was a House bill that had 9 amendments, House Bill 3086, I think it was, that changed the makeup of the Fish and Wildlife Commission. It used to be done by congressional districts. And with the census, we got an additional congressional district, which would have made 8 commissioners, 6 congressional districts and 2 at large. And that would have made an even number on the commission, and nobody wants even numbers on boards of commissions. So there was a bill that was introduced and had a lot, Srishti was intimately involved in it, and other stakeholder groups were too. But the end result was it ended up being the river basins concept. And so the governor has signed that bill. And so the commissioners will be, there'll be 2 in Northwest Oregon, 2 in kind of West Central Oregon, and then 1 in kind of Southern Klamath area, and then 1 in like Central Oregon, and then 1 in Eastern Oregon. And so that'll end up with 7 commissioners. So if you have any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer, or Sarah and Michelle can probably do a better job of answering that. The question that comes up is, well, what about the current commissioners? As I understand it, they're going to stay in place if the governor says so. There's 3 of us now that are up for reappointment for another 4 years. I termed out at the end of June, and I had Mary Wall, our chair, termed out at the end of May for this is our first 4-year term. And then I think Becky Hatfield Hyde is the next one, and she's terming out a little later this fall. And from what I hear from the director is that there are going to be some Natural Resource Agency appointments made at the September legislative session, where the Senate will be reviewing the recommendations made by the governor. And so I have submitted my application for another 4-year term. That may make some of you happy. It may make some of you sad, but, but I have submitted my application for another 4-year term. And so as you well know, we serve at the pleasure of the governor. So the governor has the final say, and then it goes to the Senate for their, I guess, final say on whether they are reappointed or not. So long report. Be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Great, Mark. Man, you guys deal with some thorny issues on that commission. That's got to be as contentious as any of the state agency commissions.
But I actually enjoy it, Carl. I think I've told you that before.
Well, we're very happy that you reapplied. That means you're going to be stuck with us, I hope. And I really appreciate the work you do there, Mark. It's pretty impressive. So thanks for that great overview. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff Mark brought up? Okay, great. All right, Mauricio, what's happening in Portland?
Afternoon, everyone. Well, like, what's happening in Portland? That is a charged question. Everything is happening in Portland. Now, in terms of me, this has been since I last saw you all. It's been a pretty fulfilling month. I've had the opportunity to be in a few events, hosting folks from the Asian American community, from the Black American community, from Latino families, just trying out fishing for the first time, introducing 10 themes of conservation. We were at a Hornings hideout for a couple of days. We went at Washougal with rural communities, and just planting the seed of why protecting this world matters for everyone. And that has been very, very heartwarming, very fulfilling. And aside from that, went camping with my family, looking forward to an upcoming trip to Klamath Falls. And that's about it. It's good to see you, everyone.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to Mauricio and his family coming for a crawdad extravaganza on the Williamson River. We're gonna have a good time. Kelly, how's the coast?
Well, it's not on fire, but it's really close. So we're good. The flat fire has definitely just really been affecting everyone over here. My husband was on a 21-day assignment, so he just got off of that. So I was understanding the life of a single parent, which was fun, but a lot of work. And we missed Dad, having him around. But my youngest daughter just turned 6, so we had a giant extravaganza weekend where we picked blueberries and went swimming in the Elk River, and then we floated the Rogue the next day, and then we went swimming at Pistol River for her birthday. So we have had big river-filled days, lots of fun in the sun while watching the plume in the background. So, and we did have a fatality here over the end of last week, which was really unfortunate, an automobile accident. So that was a lot of there's a lot of feelings and emotions going around at the Forest Service right now and the fire crew, and that's part of my family. So I'm definitely intimate with that right now. But we're getting ready to take the girls, and my husband and I are all going to go on the Wild and Scenic Rogue on this Friday. And so it's the first time my girls will get to go through the wild section. So I'm super excited. The whole family's going to go, and we're going with like 13 other people and some other kids. And so I think it'll be super, super fun. It'll be nice to have everybody together.
Kelly, I always love to hear what you're doing, man. You always have some cool stuff going on. That's really fun. That's great. Jane, how are you doing?
Well, let's see. Guess where I was during the last meeting? I was at Wyches Creek. Seems like we've almost all been there now. And I found out, Marette, on this trip that I was like really close to your house. We were out with 3 of the land conservancies, Deschutes, Blue Mountain, and Wallowa, and saw some of the projects, some of the ones we've discussed here, like the Prairie Ranch and Phipps Meadow. Got to see those firsthand. So it's really great to see these places, and if they come up again, I'll know more about them. But so that was a great trip. And then I came back, and 2 days before I was supposed to be on a plane to Costa Rica, I tripped while hiking and cracked my patella. And so I'm in a brace, 2 weeks down, 4 weeks to go. But, kind of didn't help my summer plans much. I'm finding other things to do. I'll be okay.
Wow. So you didn't get to go to Costa Rica.
I didn't, but we've rescheduled for January, so we'll be going.
Well, that sounds like fun. All right. Well, didn't you also go to Eastern Oregon? Weren't you just
Yeah, that was the trip I was just talking about, where we were at Wyches Creek. And
I thought you went to
and-
Trout Creek. Went out to the Trout Creeks.
no, we didn't go to Trout Creek on this trip. We were more in the northern part of the state. So
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, I hope your patella heals well and everything's okay.
it seems to be going as well as can be expected.
Didn't require surgery. They just put you in a brace.
No, it's a crack. So they just put me in a brace, and they think it's going to heal just fine like it is. just going to take a while.
Great. All right, well, good. Well, thank you all for that. At this point, I guess it's time to review and approve the meeting minutes. So do you have that slide, Reva, so we can get that out of the way?
I do. Should we also first acknowledge the members of the public
Yes, sorry, I forgot that.
that are here? I'm happy to do that. So want to thank those that have joined us today. Looks like we have Mike Toady from Oregon Hunters Association and Tyler Dunganon, also from OHA. Thanks for joining us, guys. We have Tim Gressif from Oregon Wildlife Foundation. Looks like we also have Tim Johnson and Jim Hawley. And then iPhone 4, I'm not sure who that is, but feel free to put your name in the chat and the organization you represent, or you can speak out at this time so we can acknowledge you for joining our meeting today. I'm not hearing anything, but yeah, thanks for joining today. We appreciate the support for OCRF. And I'm happy to share my slides now at this time and we can get started. Let's see. Can you all see that?
Yep.
All right. What are you seeing? Are you seeing slides and
Yeah,
notes?
we're seeing, see the first slide, the cover slide.
Okay, great. Perfect. All right. Take it away, Carl.
All right, so yeah, so can we get someone to move for the minutes approval?
Hey, Carl.
Yeah,
Before doing it, I guess I wanted to propose one minor clarification to the minutes. I don't know if this is the time to do it, but
this is the time, yeah.
so in the minutes, there's a sentence, it was part of Debbie's update on the budgeting and funding. And it regards to the 5 million in passage, and the line in the minutes says, in addition, 5 million in wildlife passage funds with 3 years to spend. And for me, I think it'd be helpful to clarify that a little bit. What I recall was there was $5 million in wildlife funds that become available after some bonds are sold in the spring of 25. And I don't remember if there was 3 years to spend it or if there was when that occurred, but maybe I would ask if Reva could go back with Debbie and Sarah and just clarify that part of the funding outcome and update the minutes when they go back through it.
I think Sarah is with us. Maybe that she can answer that right now and we can change the minutes.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Sarah Reif, Habitat Division Administrator. I think that's a good clarification, Mark, that those funds don't become available until the sale of the bonds in spring of 2025. As for the 3 years to spend, that sounds right, but please, we will follow up. Reva and I will follow up with Debbie and get that clarified in the notes. So I don't want to misspeak on that one, but we can make sure that the notes reflect the accuracy.
Yeah, that'd be great. And if it's 3 years, it'd be great to get a sense of, when the 3 years starts.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
So what we could do is move to approve those with the corrections as outlined regarding the wildlife crossing funding. Can we get someone to make that motion?
I'll make that motion. So moved.
Do we have a second?
Kelly, second.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, all in favor? Looks good from where I sit. Okay. Great. Okay, well, thanks for looking at that, Mark. I think that might be the first minutes correction we've ever done. So I guess that makes us a real serious organization. So thank you for doing that. All right, so moving on. We have kind of an update about just some basic stuff, just some business items that Riva and Sarah are going to do. So Riva, you want to take that?
Yeah. So today we were going to do some OCRF business items, and the first thing is going to be talking about some of the changes to the OCRF Oregon Administrative Rules. So some revisions that have been added to the existing rules. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those with you all today. And then what you can expect for our next meeting is to receive the full document with all the revisions for you to see in detail. And so that's what we'd be doing in our next meeting. So this one, I'll just go over some of the highlights. So in this revisions, we have added some definitions as one of a proposed change. And some of those definitions that we've added are, so we're defining the advisory committee, the department, the fund, agreement, commission, partners, and technical experts. The next change that we're proposing is to remove directed donations and have language for just generalized donations. And then the next change would be adding administrative costs to the expenditures section. And so that would be adding language that's stating that costs incurred by the department in administering the fund's purpose would be included in expenditures. So some examples would be staff time, communication, outreach materials, and DOJ costs. The next change would be significantly adding to our process for expenditures in rule. And so some of this section is being significantly expanded, and this was by recommendation of DOJ. So this is also to clarify the process for applicants so they can see this in rule. And some of those changes would be adding to clarify what our regular RFP process is like in rule. So that would be clarifying the process for the applicants. We're going to be listing out the program priorities for folks to read, and also adding in one RFP, at least one RFP per year in rule. The next proposed change is to the same section, would be adding urgent grants language in place of our special project language. And this would align with private forest accord rules. So this section would be, urgent grants would be a less restrictive process compared to special projects. And it would be for critical, time-sensitive, and high priority projects that would be happening outside of our regular RFP process. And then the last section that we're proposing to add an agreement section, and that's going to be adding the grant agreement clarifications. So, and describing what our reimbursement and advance pay agreements are for that section.
Riva, if I may jump in just to support you with some additional context for the committee's benefit.
Yeah.
A lot of the clarification of process, listing the program priorities, the at least one RFP per year, that is stuff that is already in your expenditure framework. And so it was really DOJ just reading the expenditure framework saying, you know what, this reads like rule, and it's better for your publics if they can go to your rules and truly understand what the application process is, how projects are evaluated. And so it's really, that part is really kind of, I would call housekeeping. And then what is more of a kind of substantive proposal coming from the department for your consideration is this distinction between like the regular solicitation projects and what we as a committee here have historically called special projects. And bringing for your consideration an idea that was developed in the private forest accord rulemaking process of this distinction between regular projects that come forward as part of the competitive solicitations and where we want to direct most of the traffic toward, and an opportunity for people to apply out of cycle, which is what PFA decided to call urgent grants. You could call them something else if that urgent didn't kind of resonate with you. And that's something that we can talk about next time as well. But I think we can bring more details of what we think would be in that urgent grant bucket or be appropriate for an out of cycle consideration by the committee when we bring you the draft rules next time. So just wanted to, in case that's helpful, wanted to provide that little bit of context for y'all.
Thank you, Sarah. Just for, I think for everyone to understand the need to do this, in some part, it is to get us aligned with the private forest accord, and also just sort of to clean up the process that, you know, that when we first set this up, there's some, as Sarah pointed out, things that should have been in different places. So it's cleaning that up. One thing that I would like to comment on, Sarah, is the change in the restricted grants or donations. And Tim has a good suggestion of, instead of using general donation, to use the term unrestricted donation rather than general. And I would like, as you're going through this and you're thinking about it, there are situations where a directed donation, that it still may be, it could be a really nice thing. In a way, what makes me think of it is what Jane has been so incredibly generous in doing, is looking at our project list and saying, okay, I will fund, I like this project, and would subsequently fund it. Ones that we ranked highly but did not make our cut because of the level of funding we had. We don't want to lose that ability for that to happen. A similar thing happened with Oregon Zoo. They gave us funding to help us round out our projects. So we're kind of restricted in the sense that it wasn't like, here, go spend this money as you see fit. It was more of a directed donation, but it was specifically for projects that we were vetting. And I don't want to throw that potential out. I think that could be a very big avenue. I think there are a lot of organizations out there that have some money, maybe not a huge amount, but it's a big job for them to go through a whole bunch of applications. We heard that from the Oregon Zoo. Mm-hmm. They said, okay, you've got the applications, you vetted them, we think you're doing a good job. Here's some funding to fund more projects, basically. So that could be considered a restricted donation. So I do think that we could even market that possibility for some of the smaller organizations that want to support, say, Oregon Conservation Strategy or non-game species, and they just don't maybe have the wherewithal to do a big elaborate RFP. So I'm not expecting an answer from you now. Just as you're thinking about it, I just thought I'd bring that up and see if you can work something out that could still be a possibility.
Appreciate that, Carl. And we can definitely tee that up for discussion next month. I will just say, not necessarily to respond to you, but just for the group's context on that one as well. If you'll recall, one of the primary reasons why why directed donations were coming through the department once upon a time. It was back in that early days of OCRF when legislature challenged us to match their $1 million appropriation with $1 million in donations. And so people would, donors would direct funds to certain projects and receive some state match. We no longer have that program, that matching program anymore. And so our proposal is that it's probably just simplest for everyone. If a donor has an interest in further supporting a project that was funded with OCRF dollars, that they work directly with the organization that's leading that project and donate directly to that project. However, we want to track that as having an association with OCRF. And I think there's a way for us to do that. It's just why route it through the agency's bureaucracy when you could just donate directly. We've also contemplated and this is something we can talk about next time as well, we are more than happy to share our ranked and vetted list with donors who kind of want to benefit from all of the review and vetting that has been done by this committee and the technical experts, in case there are projects sort of down list that we didn't get to fund that they would like to support. So that's something that we can continue to provide to donors as well.
Okay, just as long as I just didn't want, I think that there's an opportunity to have that happen in a meaningful way. And I just want to make sure as you're writing it up that we don't do something that precludes that. So.
Right. Okay. Yes, we will keep that in mind.
Great. Well, thank you.
Great, thanks, everybody. And we'll be continuing this discussion for next month's meeting on the proposed changes. And so I expect we'll probably spend a little bit more time next month on these once you see them in detail. So probably we'll have a longer discussion next month for that. And so the next thing I had for today was going to be discussing a winter RFP timeline with everybody, the committee. But before I go into the specific timeline that I'm proposing for the next RFP, I thought we should talk about some just considerations for what we want to put as our cap for the next RFP and some different considerations for next year. So if the group is okay with discussing this, I'm wondering what would be an award cap that will make a meaningful difference. If we want to keep that at 50,000, are people wanting to increase it to 75? And keeping in mind, what we have in our funds for this consideration would be, we have 3.6 for drought funding. That's including the 1 million that we just received from our recent legislative session. And so would we want to have our next RFP be a drought package RFP? Do we want to combine our classic OCRF projects in with that drought RFP? Another option would be separating them out and having our classic OCRF projects that would be funded by our 400K in the base fund and setting a cap for that. So just some different considerations for the group to consider and how we want to set our next RFP. And then a recommendation for this RFP is to have 20 projects or less in total, whether we're separating them out or, and that's to allow the coordinator and the contracts team to have proper support, provide proper support for the projects that we put through. But yeah, I just want to open it up to the group. Carl, if you want to lead the discussion, that would work on considerations for the next RFP.
Yeah, I think it's important that we get this stuff. The RFP is coming up, and I wanted her to bring it up so that we could make sure we had it laid out. I don't think this is not to make decisions at this meeting, but
Mhm.
maybe by the next meeting.
Brainstorming, yeah. Mhm.
This is to talk about it. And as Reva pointed out, we do have some funding. I'll say this, in my conversations with the legislatures, we had some money left over from our first drought funding, and that was noted and I think played a somewhat of a role in the amount of money that we got this year. So I'm all for spending it. We kind of were being frugal and like, oh, we'll keep a little in reserve and we maybe should have a little bit of reserve, but not 2.5 million, which was our reserve, because I think that potentially hurt us because we still had that. So I think we should not hesitate to so we have 3 more RFPs, basically, if we follow our schedule. And we have around $4 million to spend. So we might bump up our total amount. We might increase the maximum. And part of the other thing we're finding is just because of the logistics of it all, the number of projects, we don't want to overwhelm our administrative ability to deal with them all. So there's lots of moving parts there. And I'm asking you all to be thinking about it, and we can come up with some conclusions maybe at the next meeting. Mauricio, you have your hand up?
Thank you, Carl. I have a question and potentially a subsequent thought. So this is for Reva. So this number of 20 projects or less, is this sort of like what has been estimated at what is a manageable amount of projects per RFP based on staff constraints and time? Is that correct?
Yes, Mauricio, that's correct. That's probably the max that we can provide. The coordinator and contracts team can provide sufficient support for 20 projects in a single RFP.
Thank you, Reva.
Mhm.
So here's what may be potentially a controversial thought. I feel that there are some projects and some organizations that are out of a smaller scale to whom even $10,000 could make a huge difference. If we have set the scale as like, it's 50K, there are folks that are far more familiar with these RFPs that, they have no problem asking for that and much more. Folks that already have gone through this process several times. And sometimes we lean towards those who are asking for higher amounts because we feel that the impact just might be greater. And it makes sense, like some infrastructure projects, the cost of construction, some of the costs are just significantly larger, and even 50 or 75K, it would be but a fraction of what the actual cost of some of these projects are. And so I'm wondering if there may be a way in which we can separate in terms of scales of impact for those potentially that have been shy, and I know this, have been shy to apply for 50K because they truly just need $7,000 to do X, Y, and Z. It's a smaller group, but that could have a very tangible and direct influence and outcomes of smaller groups or smaller projects. And so I would love to have a way in which we can gauge, if we only have 20 projects that we can fund at each time, then maybe also find a balance on those that are not just because they want to ask for the maximum amount, but for us to imagine, well, what is it really doing? And I know that we have this in our impact monitoring system, which we still sort of like developing ourselves. But I'd love for that to be an aspect of the criteria in which we evaluate the whole of the 20 projects that we could accommodate per cycle.
Mauricio, I really appreciate that. I've been struggling with that myself. Maret, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if instead of having so far when we've done projects, we've always had sort of a set amount that we said, well, we have 1 million or 1.2 million. We could just change that to 20 projects. And then it would it'll be a little simpler. And I'm also wondering if 75,000 requires more vetting in any way than 50,000, or is there a certain, I mean, that's a lot of money to give away, and I know you have to vet certain groups. So those are my questions.
Yeah, my understanding of that, Marat, is there is a big shift if you get to 150,000. It is not from 50 to 75. If you go to 150, there's a whole different process. Mark Cern?
Yeah, sort of following the train of thought here. I know OWEB has what they call, I think, a small grants program, I believe. And the question sort of on the other end of the spectrum is if ODF&W is to do a grant for $9,999 or less, does that require less staff capacity and grant oversight and review? Is it a way to fund the smaller amounts, smaller based projects?
That's a great point,
I-
Mark. I think that from what I understand, from what Carl said was what I know is that the 150K, once you go over that, there is more DOJ approval involved and through the granting process. And so it takes a little bit extra time. I'm not sure if there is a difference in processing time for if it's less than 10K. I don't believe that there is. But maybe somebody else
Yeah,
can jump
Mark.
in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in my experience with the small grants, we run a small grant team here in the Southwest region for OWEB, and it's the same amount of administrative work. And in fact, I kind of hate the small grants even more because it's the same amount of legwork for, they're $15,000 and under, so you get about 13 on the ground by the time it's done. And they, it just kind of keeps hanging in line with the rest of the grants, so it does just seem to be the same. They also require 2-year monitoring reports, all these other sort of things. So it's a really cool program. I appreciate it a lot, but it's just, it doesn't seem any less burdensome.
Well, again, this actually is relevant to the discussions we're going to have following in terms of our direction and what are our priorities going to be. And I think historically we filled a niche that other people didn't, because we had this. Well, first, we didn't have hardly any money, so we were giving away 10 grand at a pop. And as Mauricio so well pointed out, that was very valuable to those groups. So we have to weigh the administrative issues and the number of projects with trying to help these groups that have been looking to us for funding. And I would ask Sarah, in her thinking about all this, about as we're moving forward, if there's ways we can accommodate that sort of situation, like even if we had a separate RFP for small projects and could fund more for a less amount, or is that just going to be too onerous, or are there ways to structure it so it's not as onerous? And it may be that it is what it is, but if there's ways to get around that, I'd ask you to take a look at that. Mauricio had his hand up.
Thank you, Carl. So what I'm hearing from Kelly and also from Riva is it seems to me that regardless of the amount, this is sort of like a one size. Can you hear me okay? It seems like we have sort of like a one size fits all process for screening all these projects. And I'm wondering if that might be one of the things that we can sort of like redesign for our own purposes. Perhaps the amount of scrutiny and administrative work that it would require for grants that are below a certain amount could be restrained to a certain set of tasks that would fall on. And then for those who are of higher amounts, then the higher the amount of scrutiny. And then that's how we balance that so that we remain within the amount of hours and work allotted for the 20 projects, which seems to be the manageable amount per cycle. So maybe that's one way that we can sort of like try to tailor fit some of this, and we're still trying to create the most impact that we can get out of these dollars.
Yeah, I think what Riva and I can do is go check back in with contracts to find out if there is a certain dollar amount that makes things more streamlined administratively. But we can also come to you all with a couple of maybe different sort of packaged options. And one of those might be I mean, a lot of things are possible. So it could be a singular RFP, but you are either putting in for the small or like community grants or some sort of moniker, as opposed to like a drought related project. So that the bucket over here that is what I call classic OCRF projects, they're smaller, they sort of engage the communities. They're being compared against each other, but they're not being compared against these whopper restoration projects that look really glamorous. So that's one benefit of doing something like that. I'll just caution that I predict that it will be challenging to create administrative streamlining for small projects where there's community engagement, because that's where the insurance scrutiny comes in when you're involving people and children and taking them places. So we might get, our gains might be in more closely managing the base fund for classic projects and in creating a more fair comparison for those smaller projects. They may not be in like administrative streamlining, but we will look into all that and maybe bring a couple of straw men forward for consideration.
Yeah, this is great. Great conversation. I like the ideas you just presented, Sarah. I think there's some really opportunity there to kind of structure it in a bit different way. But that's why we're doing this. We have this little hiatus here where we don't have an RFP, and maybe we can come up with a really nice streamlined way, as streamlined as possible, to address all these different elements of what other things we want to achieve, and maybe having like 2 different sections of one RFP, one round of funding. I really like what you said about comparing the smaller community-based projects against themselves, then trying to compare them to some science-based restoration project. I think that maybe is a really nice way. So in the interest of time, I don't think we can hash this out too much more, but yeah, if we can plan on having a discussion about that at the next meeting, and I think that'll give us enough time to kind of come up with a plan. So with that in mind, Reva, I think you have a timetable also for when the next RFP is.
Yeah, I have a proposed timeline, if you can all see that, which would be starting our winter 2024 RFP in January 30th of next year, and then having it close on March 30th, so it'd be open for 60 days. And then following that, the tech review period would be for 4 weeks. The advisory committee review period would be for 4 weeks after that. And then we'd do our select recommendations for the committee on grants, and release of funds would be in August of next year.
So when is the release of funds for our most recent RFP happening?
That's happening this month, the end of the month, and beginning of September.
Okay, so we've only taken a 6-month hiatus,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like it's going to be a year before we release any new funds. So somehow that didn't track for me. What am I missing?
Well, from the opening of the RFP to the close of it is 2 months. And then our typical timeline is 6 months the whole process takes about 6 months.
All right. So yeah, so I see. We lost 6 months. This is the next 6 months. That's why it's a year from now. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's killing me. I think we have to do it this way. I just don't like the sense of loss of momentum we've got here, and people that want to apply to us. We're going to have to really think about engaging everyone early on, when we open up this RFP. Mark?
Yeah, I sort of have the same feeling. I don't think what I'm about to say makes that big a difference, but I wonder if we really need 2 months to review the proposals. I realize the department staff has some time limitations, so I don't want to short shrift them, but you know, if the advisory committee was to start reviewing things, I don't know, that 60 days seems like a long period for that, but I guess even if we cut it off by a month, it only really moves up the process a month. And I guess what I'm seeing is if funds are released in August, it's not gonna help anybody doing a project next spring or next summer anyway, so.
Yeah, Mark, I totally agree that it'd be nice to figure out a way to quicken that, but it may not make much difference.
Could
I
we
think those are things to think about, and I'd ask Reva, she's got more insight into the nuts and bolts of it. If there's what, I would like to try to move things along a bit. Jane?
I was just wondering whether we could take some time off at the beginning of that. And instead of having it open on January 30th, could it open on like January 1st, or, you know, move things up at that instance? We've got a 6-month hiatus anyway. And hopefully that hiatus will help the staff catch up with some of the backlog of things that need to be done on the last batch.
I like that, Jane. I see. Yeah, so we could move the whole thing up. I mean, again, this process, and I think Sherilyn, we got to get her running the show here pretty quick, but we don't want to spend enormous amounts of time reinventing the wheel here and getting into the weeds. So giving ourselves, 4 to 5 months, we don't necessarily need that. So starting the process where we're going to actually open it earlier, I think is a really good suggestion, Jane. And I'll talk to Reva and Sarah about that in between now and the next meeting. And that'll give us time to maybe come up with a different timeline. I appreciate that, Jane. I think that's a viable idea. Again, it's in the interest of not losing momentum and keeping the folks we're funding, engaged and saying, oh, great. It's they're having to sit it out a whole session. So those are all good ideas. So Reva, thanks for putting this timeline together. It's helped us think about it. Bring some stuff back. Sarah?
Just very quickly, I wanted to announce, this is just a business item before we pass it over to Sherilyn. Just wanted to announce that we have offered Reva the limited duration OCRF coordinator position, which runs through the end of October, and Reva has accepted that position. So if you recall, we have this funky situation where we have to hire a limited duration, and then we'll be recruiting for the permanent at the same time that Reva is sitting in this limited duration. So at least step one was to get the limited duration hired, and we're very happy to announce Reva Gilman for continuing in this role, at least through October.
Great. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Sarah.
And just so everyone understands, Reva's going to reapply and go through the whole process. And so what's the timing of that, Sarah?
I'm submitting the recruitment paperwork as we speak. And so then it begins just the churn through human resources as they're processing hundreds of other recruitments at the start of the biennium right now. So ideally we would be running interviews and checking into candidates in September with a hire date coming on at the conclusion of this limited duration position. So a hire date coming on in October, end of October.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you. So, you guys recognize that Sarah's with us in our meetings. She's really been great for us. So again, I've said it before, but I really appreciate it, Sarah. Thank you for the time you put in for the OCRF. Okay, so is anybody have any other comments about what we've discussed, sort of some business items? We'll bring back more details and have a similar kind of discussion at the next meeting. But if no one has anything more to add to that, which I'm not seeing any hands up, then I think we can move on to sort of the main event. And Sherilyn, I think hearing this conversation is helpful to you to see the kind of things we're grappling with, and what the kind of questions we want to address in this process. I hope this is helpful to you in understanding, kind of where we are and trying to figure out the way forward from here. And with that, though, I think I've semi-introduced Sherilyn to everybody, but why don't, Sherilyn, if you don't mind, would you introduce yourself and sort of explain to everybody the role you think you're going to play, and we can move on.
Yeah, well, just first off, really great to see all of you again that were part of the OCRF. In those early COVID days, I often refer to you as my COVID friends because we all got started in I believe April of 2020 was our first meeting. So we were all living in a very strange time when we started working together, but we just did such great work together, and I've missed you all, and I've been following the OCRF and seeing all of the great things you've done. So really excited to be back with you for the strategic planning process. For people that may not remember, or for Kelly, who's new, and other members of the public that I might not have run across in a meeting before. So I work for a firm called Pivotal Resources. We do strategic planning, change management, process improvement type work for a lot of different organizations. Happen to do a lot of work with Oregon state agencies, including ODF&W, which is how I got connected with OCRF back in 2020 when you guys were getting started. So looking forward to sharing today a little bit about the process that I'm recommending that we go through, get some of your input on it, hear a little bit about your expectations for the process, talk about any outreach we might want to do, and we can see how the time goes. If we don't get to everything, no big deal. We're going to be seeing each other, I believe, at every meeting from now through December. There will be some time dedicated to moving this planning process forward. So we'll adapt as we go. So I'm going to bring up some slides here. Everybody see agenda item 3? Great. Okay. So I think Riva and Sarah too, if you just want to help with this piece. So before we get going and talking about strategic planning, we thought it was good to just have a little bit of a grounding in what the original purpose was for the OCRF. I just captured, some words that you guys use out there on your websites and in other places to sort of, and from the legislation that helps form the OCRF, to kind of describe what the purpose of the group is and how it's important for us to stay true to that, but also to talk about where there's room for expansion as well within the original guidelines that were given to the OCRF. So these were some of the things that I pulled out. Riva, Sarah, anything you'd like to add to that sort of grounding conversation?
Yeah, so I think I would add just a few of our grounding purpose is connecting youth and families and diverse and underserved communities to the outdoors as well. With what you have there is great. And you've mentioned, implementing the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which is core to OCRF, and recognizing Oregon's diversity by encouraging all Oregonians to enjoy our rich outdoor heritage, and investing in science and research to increase our understanding of the natural world, to make sound, informed decisions regarding fish, wildlife, and habitat. Yeah, those are a few things I would add to our grounding purpose. And I'm not sure if Sarah has anything to add, or if we want to open it up to the group. This could be a group thought as well.
I wouldn't really add anything to the list. I would just give everyone a heads up that we've invited Davia to provide a little history of OCRF at our September meeting. She's in Maine right now, hopefully having fun on the coast of Maine. But I think, given Davia Palmieri's history with sort of the origin story of OCRF, it'll be really great next time to have her sort of help remind us of where things began and also how things have evolved.
I think that'll be really helpful. And this is not a small thing here, talking about our purpose. And it's something for everybody to think about. And because our purpose is, as you all know, we have been broad. We cover just about anything that might have even tangential association with the Oregon Conservation Strategy. And that's who we've been. And part of this process is to decide or say that's the way we want to keep going. Do we want to focus? Do we want to hone down on certain things, or do we stay as we have traditionally been, as a really broad-based effort? And I think it's worth having that conversation. And if we decide that we want to stay the same, then by stating that, then it helps guide us and makes it clear who we are. And so these kind of ideas, as Riva added to the different things that we do, it is a long list. And so I think that's part of the conversation, and for each of us to be thinking about, do we want to continue with that really broad base? Do we want to focus more? I don't have a foregone conclusion on that, but it's something for us all to think about.
Yeah, I think it was great to bring this up today. We're going to learn more from Davia. We're going to do a little bit more of, current state analysis. And yeah, by the end of the process, I think we'll have better answers to that question. All right, so feel free, please put your hand up at any point as we go along here if you want to stop and talk about something, or you just want a little bit of clarity. So what are we trying to do with this strategic plan? So basically it will help define our direction for the next 2 biennia. So that's the period of time that we want to be able to cover with the strategic plan. These are some of the common things that you will find in most strategic plan documents. There's usually a vision and a mission. I know OCRF has a vision, or did at one time. It's in the expenditure framework, if I remember correctly. I don't know if we call out a mission, but we have a lot of purpose statements from the legislature and other things. So typically a vision and a mission would be in there. The vision would be more aspirational and the mission would be more aligned in why we exist. So that purpose conversation that we were just having. Sometimes plans have values. So that's something that we should talk about along the way. So what's important to us in doing the work? I know from my previous time, you guys have a lot of them that we talked about in terms of setting up how we're going to make decisions about choosing projects, etc. But we might want to be more overt about them. Priority areas. So what are the areas for us to be focusing on? The goals that we might want to set for ourselves within those priority areas, and then actions to achieve the goals. So think of priorities, goals, and actions, kind of like Russian nesting dolls, right? So you start with your priority areas, you end up with some specific goals to achieve in the next 2 biennia, and then you specify what are the things we're actually going to do that we think is going to help us achieve those goals that we outlined for ourselves for the next 2 biennia. So in general, this is what you can expect is likely to end up in the plan. I say likely because every group is a little different. Sometimes we take deviations along the way, but in general, these are the things that we would look to put in the document. Any questions or comments about the contents of the plan itself as the end product? Okay. So how are we going to get there? So I didn't put well, actually, no, I do have the timeline, so we'll hold that. So we're going to get through facilitated discussions. So that's kind of my role. Carl said, what's Sherilyn here to do as part of developing the strategic process? Well, I'm here to help facilitate conversations that will help us write that plan. So identify all the things that were on the previous page. So that's really the biggest part of the process. As I mentioned, there'll probably be discussions starting at this meeting all the way through the December meeting, making a little progress along the way. There may be some stakeholder input. I have an asterisk on that one because we're going to talk about that a little bit more. There will then be a draft plan that the members will have a chance to review. I'm sure there will be some refinement that will have to be done, and then there will be the final plan document. So in terms of overall timing and a little bit more specifics on what this looks like, and again, please feel free to put your hand up if you have a question. So today we're just grounding ourselves. What does this look like? How are we going to work together? What are we doing? I want to get some of your input on your expectations. We're going to talk about stakeholder outreach. That's why I had the asterisk by that one. And if we have time, I know we got a little behind, but if we have time, we might start doing having a strengths weaknesses conversation. So I think this is a really great time, anytime you're starting strategic planning, to kind of take stock of all that you've accomplished and all that you've done, and really acknowledge where the OCRF is unique and special and has positive things and valuable things to offer the space, and then where you're kind of limited, right? Maybe where you don't have the expertise you need or the resources you need. So that's what we're going to try to do today. In September, we're going to come back and probably finish that, because we're only starting it today by having a strengths weaknesses. It would be good to talk about sort of the political climate that impacts all of your work, eco-socioeconomic things that are impacting your work, things along that. So we'll continue that in September and probably start to have a conversation to help decide anything we might want to review around our vision, mission, and basic values. So, that kind of becomes the umbrella for everything else. In October, yeah, Carl.
Yeah, I really like the idea of continuing this conversation, this part of it in September, in part because we have two really important, very high contribution members that are not here today, and
Yes.
really want them engaged. Liza Jane and Sristi really want to have their input in this early stage, and I'd love to hear their thoughts on both of them came in later. And so they're going to have a different perspective that I think is very important for us to hear, along with Kelly. Just kind of, there's some of us that have been here all along. But anyway, I'm very happy to hear that you're going to continue that next meeting.
Yeah. The other thing too is Davia will be here in September, so we'll be able to kind of get some input from her and through the history lesson that she'll provide us. One thing to note is, even though I'm kind of outlining the things I think we're going to talk about at any meeting, I don't want you all to ever think something's closed because we talked about it in September, because it really is kind of a living process, and things might come up later on in October and you think, wow, we really should have talked about this in September when we were talking about our vision, mission, and values. So never think anything is kind of complete in September, but it's just sort of a way to organize the main topics of conversation as we go along. We're not going to be drafting the plan until January. So that means that gives us plenty of time to circle back to anything. It also might mean that we spend more or less time in some areas. It's kind of an organic process sometimes. And so I might change what we do based on how I think it's going and where we need to spend time. So this is sort of preliminary plan of what I think will happen, but it could adjust a bit. So in October, if we were to do any outreach, we talk about what we learned from it. We talk about how it might impact our priority areas, because again, if you think about the Russian nesting dolls, we're going to probably be identifying big priority areas first. And that will help us also have conversations about the OCRF's role in the future, maybe the role of ODF and W staff, the role of partners, anybody else that sort of all works together to make this successful, I think we'll start to have a better idea of, so that we can maybe do a draft of what the priority areas in October are, or at least have some ideas around what they are. In November, again, you'll see we never talk about that one meeting. We're always going to come back to things. So in November, maybe we're finalizing priorities so that we can start a discussion around goals and objectives. And then start a preliminary conversation around actions within December is kind of our last opportunity to really refine and prioritize the goals and actions. Sometimes you'll come up with more things than you think are practical, and we have put a time horizon on the plan for OCRF of being 2 biennium. So it could be that all these goals sound great and all these actions sound great, but we know we can't do all of that in the 2 biennium. So there might be some prioritization that happens at the December meeting too. Again, we'll just sort of play it by ear and how that goes along the way. Questions about just in general, any of these things that I've shared we're going to be doing together over the next several months?
Sherilyn, I just have I'm wondering if you can full screen your slides a little bit more. I don't know if it's for
they're
others
not
as well,
full
but yeah, maybe like use slideshow.
That's
might
what
do
I,
it.
that's
Huh.
what I'm in. Does it look that way for other people too? It's not looking full screen?
We're seeing the
is.
presenter
We're
view,
seeing-
Sherilyn.
How strange.
Here we
Oh,
go.
perfect. That's it. Thank you.
Maybe I was only halfway there. Okay, thanks for letting me know.
Yep.
Hopefully nothing else was too small and you got the gist of what I was sharing. All right, so I think, so moving on, so this is the process, right? This is me sort of facilitating a series of conversations between now and the end of the year. And then I thought it'd be really helpful to share these, which Riva and Sarah and Carl sort of saw when we were talking about what this looks like, which is, these are some of the key questions we'd like to answer through the process. So what have we accomplished so far? Our priorities, our goals, what we're going to do. Then it gets into some specific things, right? So I would say those first 5 bullets are in every strategic plan. That shouldn't really be surprising. But then there's some specific things that I think have been weighing on the committee as things to be decided and move forward and or not. So things like the effective monitoring, the fact that you have funding changes on a regular basis. So how do we become more adaptable to times with lots of money, times with maybe not a lot of money? Storytelling and communication. I think, this is a time-consuming thing, but often important for an organization like you. So what do you want to accomplish in that realm? I think with a side note, we're not going to create a communications plan as part of this process, but you could decide that we need to do increased communications to these audiences for this purpose, and it becomes an action for you to take. So just a little bit of a clarification there. Private fundraising. Do we still need to be doing that? Is that OCRF's role? Is it somebody else's role? What does that look like? Do we have some specific goals? And then how do we continue to engage with partners who are interested in the OCRF? So I anticipate that through all of those conversations I laid out from August to December, the answers to these things will start to become more clear. But we want to keep them sort of, in our back pocket so that when we're having the conversations, we're thinking about things like this that we think are important things to be answered. Other things that any of you think are key questions you'd like answered as part of the strategic planning process.
Mark Stern.
Yeah, I think that's a good list of questions, and some of my thoughts as they sort of percolate through my head here align with the last one of how do we engage with partners who are interested in OCRF. And so I think that circles back to communications and storytelling and some of that work as well. But I guess I'm thinking about, we have 115 or so grant recipients that have all received money from OCRF and have been working with us. And I think there's a real resource and an asset there that we need to think about their input to this process, as well as I would hope, how do we use their support to help build this program to be stronger as it goes forward. And stronger in part is contingent on being successful in getting legislative funding. So I think about that as a piece of what a coalition could do to help us achieve some of the things that I think we'll outline there, which again, maybe is a sub bullet somewhere for at least trying to, I don't know if OCRF in itself can have a legislative strategy, but being aware that funding comes through the legislature. So how do we position a coalition of supporters to help us achieve some of those goals?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's good. Mauricio?
Thank you, Sherilyn. I'm gonna try to articulate this as best as I can. When I first joined OCRF, something that really was exciting for me is that we were born out of a challenge. So like, if you can raise this, and I feel this was a way of testing whether or not this sort of like hybrid, more broad way of looking at funding projects that potentially could not find funding elsewhere, in that intersection between conservation and recreation. I feel that it would be important for us to remember what makes us different from other funding sources. What gap are we addressing that other places could not? How we do not become yet another brand of peanut butter and instead something that nobody else can offer, and how we remain focused in the ways in which we can breach those gaps and see how we can serve those. So to some degree, it would be another key question would be like, what makes us different? What makes us unique? And what gaps are we addressing in funding? Because I think that might help us have a true north in our own specific compass.
Yeah, I love that. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm not going to take up too much of your time because it seems like my comment is kind of also in the vein of Mark and Mauricio, but I think we are still a very unique organization. So it would be really interesting. I don't know about like adding another question or something, but thinking about, these organizations that we are making a lot of effect on and with. So, I mean, anybody who can write federal grants and all these other sort of grants can write these grants because they're fairly straightforward, which is lovely. And I really appreciate that. But I think that is something we should utilize for people who are not used to writing eloquent, giant federal grants and answering to all those questions, and really, find that sort of unique spot where we can continue to kind of bring people up. So that's in the same vein of those guys. But yeah, I think I'd like to see that. Like, what's our impact there on like smaller organizations or starting organizations versus people who have been going?
Great. Carl?
Yeah, it's been great hearing these comments. And as I'm listening to Mauricio and Mark and everyone comment, and again, and thinking back on our genesis, we were really pretty unique, and we offered a unique thing, and we stayed very nimble. And I think we pushed some boundaries, which, because being the state organization, we went ahead and pushed them and got away with it. But I want to maintain that entrepreneurial spirit that we had. And as Mauricio and Mark were talking, I kept thinking about our relationship with our partners, and in particular, I thought about Oregon Wildlife Foundation, and I think we should explore how the OCRF can work with the Oregon Wildlife Foundation. As an example is we were able to hire Sherilyn, get her in here quick, avoid a lot of bureaucratic stuff, because we did it through the Oregon Wildlife Foundation. And that may help. So again, it's just something for us to be thinking about and talking about. And of course, Tim would have some ideas about that as well, but I can't help but thinking that there's ways to incorporate that in what we do. So I just want to bring it up.
Yeah, good addition. Merit?
Hi, it's Marat.
Right, yes, Merit.
I guess my passion has always been, how do we help ODF and W increase its collaborative capacity? Because of what I saw happen in the Forest Service during my career, when we really started working carefully with partners. And now we have, trail programs on the Deschutes National Forest, which basically, from volunteers, which basically do 95% of the trail maintenance that's required on the National Forest. And so I guess anything that we could do to sort of tease that out. I mean, how do we continue to build collaborative capacity? There's always this sort of push and pull that the pie isn't big enough and that the pie is limited. And if you give somebody a piece of the pie, somebody else doesn't get it. But you can also think of it as the pie getting much bigger. And so somehow being able to look at collaboration and how that can be inspired to help ODF&W do its job.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Thanks for adding those. So I think, we can add some of that in. I don't think any of that falls too out of scope of what we're trying to achieve and creating the plan. So thanks for adding those specific things that we want to make sure to keep in the foreground. It's like we all need this as a little note card through our conversations over the next couple of months to make sure we cover them all. So this kind of is an alignment, and I know some of you started to share, but I want to make sure I hear from everybody on the committee. So I'd really be interested in your input on your hopes or expectations for the process. So I've given you an outline of how I think the process is going to go over the next couple of months. So hopes and expectations for how that process works, how you're involved and engaged, etc. And then any hopes or expectations you have for the plan document itself. That will be the final deliverable. I won't tell you how long of a document it will be, but there will be a document where we'll outline all of those different elements that we talked about before. So hopes, expectations for either one of these elements. Anybody want to start? I might call on a few people just so I hear from everybody today. How about Kelly? Hopes, expectations for the process or the plan itself?
You can sense that I like to talk, huh? No. I think my hopes are that we do. I know it's really hard to slow down. I understand that. But I think it's really important that we're taking a moment to slow down. Again, I haven't been a part of this process the whole way through. But I think that anytime that you can stop and stand back and look with a fresh perspective, and like Carl even mentioned too, we have some more new people on board too. So it's really interesting to kind of stand back with new view to look and see if we are hitting the goals we want. I would actually really love to, I didn't see it, or I'm not sure when, but like if there's a way to involve some ODFW staff, aside from Davi and the people that have been directly involved with this process, but if there are other staff that want to comment on this process as well, what's working for them, what's not, also for review, and if they would like to put in any bucket for priority or those kind of things. So I think since this is in concert with ODFW, I would like to hear from them during this process as well. But I'm just hoping we, take a minute and slow down. It's actually January's like tomorrow, so it's going to be here before you know it, and we're going to be there. So that's what I have to say right now.
Yeah, time has a way
Something
of
straightforward too. Yeah.
Yeah, time has
Easy to
a way
read.
of way faster than you think it's going to.
Amen. Yes.
Somebody else want to share? How about Mark? Since you didn't share new questions on the previous slide, I'll ask you what you're thinking. Hopes, expectations.
Well, I think Kelly gave a good summary there. I think it'd also be interesting to hear, from Mark Labhart and the commission a little bit what their hopes and expectations are on it from ODF&W. And I hope it's just in terms of a process and I think you're really good at it, but it's an easy process for everybody to share and express their thoughts. And it's, I appreciate you going around in a circle and calling people out so that everybody gets to contribute, whether they were ready to raise their hand and offer something up or whether you have to drag it out of them. But I think it's important to hear from everybody.
Yeah, what's great is I've always found this group when I worked with you to not be afraid of sharing your opinions. So hopefully that continues, that people are willing to speak up and share their thoughts. And you know me, I like to get everybody's input and make sure that everybody has a chance. So hopes, expectations, anybody else?
I just keep thinking about all the restrictions that have been placed by the legislature on our funding. And it seems like one of the things I really hope we address in this is how do we have stable funding that we are able to put towards our most important goals and not just whatever is their whim at this time we're going to fund this thing and next time how about this thing, instead of just you talk about unrestricted money, and we've been very restricted. So I hope we can figure out how we're going to address that.
Thanks, Jane. Any other committee members want to add? Oh, there you go, Mauricio, doing the old fashioned hand, but I was on the other screen of photos. Mauricio.
No worries. I think it would be pertinent for us to remember that we are not just a person in this committee. We are not also just representing a part of our geography, but we are one and we are also many. And it would be important for us to remember who is not in the room when we start making choices about how we go about developing this process and ultimately how this funding is distributed. We all come with titles, expertise, and things that make us think in a very peculiar and sometimes narrow way. We use language and we use concepts. We speak oftentimes for the life that's been afforded to us, and to the best of our ability, we should try to remember that the purpose of this committee and ultimately the purpose of those funds are serving a much wider range, a large spectrum of needs within the communities that can apply to this. And so I would hope that we can all remember as we start throwing ideas and how to optimize the process that we've already started, to remember that we are here as the voice of many. That's it.
Great, well said, Mauricio. Maret?
Well, I think the SWOT process is great. I've used it before with different groups. The one thing I'm hoping is that we can reuse and not belabor some of the stuff we've already done. We did a lot of good thinking. There was an excruciating amount of wordsmithing early on goals and all that kind of stuff. So, spending time where it's really, really going to make a difference, which is more the strategy. And something that Mark Labhart said during our dinner really struck me. He said he's tired of random acts of kindness in terms of our funding, which is kind of echoing what Jane has. I mean, we're getting these pots of money, but they're very restricted, and looking for a way that we could have a more steady income stream that is more broad so that we can reach out to a broader audience of need.
Great. Thanks for sharing that you had done a SWOT and or a pestle analysis in the past. I was actually going to ask earlier and I forgot to. Has anybody been part of developing a strategic plan for an organization before? Regardless of whether you did SWOT or pestle. Okay, good. Almost everybody on the list. That's very helpful. So a lot of the things that we go through, you've been through before. So you all know the pitfalls, and if I step into one of them, you'll help to pull us out. I think the hardest thing in a strategic planning process is to stay allow exploration, but not allow it to detour the process so much that we can't, move through and get it done in a timely fashion. So good to know the experience level of the group with strategic planning. Jane.
I'm not sure if she had her hand up before or not, but Jane has her hand up. No? Okay. Sarah has her hand up.
Just to offer up a little bit of the agency's sort of hopes for this process. Definitely focused in on some of the latter half of those questions that Sherilyn had up before, where, what is, how do we want to engage with partners? And I think that relates to some of the interests that others have expressed about, how do we keep engaging with people who have not been able to take advantage of OCRF yet? How do we keep engaging new and diverse audiences, but also how do we continue to retain support for and advocacy for OCRF? So I think that'll be I'm really looking forward to this process for us to kind of think about that. We won't be writing an outreach strategy as part of this process, but at least deciding maybe where we want to lean in and put some of our energy and put some of our focus. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I think that also, we've always had that coalition, the OCRF coalition, who I feel fairly confident that they're also going to be looking at even bigger questions in the state of Oregon, like, broader alternative funding to support the Oregon conservation strategy. And so this is a great time for us to be thinking about what's OCRF's role in that larger conversation. So that's my hope, is that the other thing I will say is that as much as I share that desire for us to have sustained long-term funding, I'm also planning for sort of the short term where we won't necessarily have that. And so how do we set ourselves up to hold true to that original purpose while being agile and adaptable for the funding that does come our way? So I don't have a preconceived answer to that question, but it's a question I'm holding.
Great. Any other final thoughts anybody wants to share in terms of your expectations or hopes for the process or the document itself? Nobody's actually talked anything about the document itself. So I'll give you my perspective, and I'll see how it aligns with all of you regarding the document itself. I really favor documents that are pithy and to the point, and that people will actually read and reference versus, novels that collect dust and have way more words than are really necessary, when all we're trying to do is articulate our strategy and commit ourselves to some specific goals and actions. So maybe you all can react to whether that feels right for the OCRF strategic plan, or if you might have a different expectation.
I'm totally on board with what you just said. The shorter and sweeter, the better.
Great. I see a thumbs up from Kelly. Good. Thumbs up from Jane. Great. Yeah, I think a lot of times organizations make the mistake by trying to put too much emphasis on writing long documents with lots of words. But I think what's more important is to just be clear and concise on what you're trying to accomplish over the next 2 biennia. So thanks, Mauricio. I saw your support as well. So if we moving along, so stakeholder outreach. So this was a part of the process that had an asterisk on it because I wanted to talk about it today. And I think talk about it in terms of different options that are available, and a reminder on when you might be able to leverage stakeholder outreach for the benefit of the OCRF, especially because we're on a tight timeline. I know for you all, it probably feels like a long time because you're eager to get back to funding projects, but it's also, but it is pretty quick process, right? And we only meet once a month, et cetera. So things for us to consider in terms of other, so when I say, stakeholders, I'm really talking about, anybody that's interested in the work of OCRF and how do we get their voice voice. And you all started mentioning this in the last segment, right? You said, I'd like to hear what some ODF and W people think, maybe beyond, Davia and Sarah. Maybe we'd want to know more about the commission's thoughts on our direction. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. So there's probably room for some input that we can use to help us develop the strategic plan. So that would be understanding, their needs and desires, their views, just like we talked about in that last segment, and really help to, foster important connections and have buy-in for your priorities. Because once the plan is set, you've kind of established what your priorities are. So anybody that you think you'd want their voice helping you to make decisions around the priorities would be important to do early in the process, right? Over the next few months. But I think because of the timeline, there's also outreach you can do after the strategic plan is finalized. So even if we have a very small scope of stakeholder outreach as part of the strategic planning process, I mentioned earlier, you'll probably have some communication goals in your plan, and part of that could be to go out and now get support for achieving your goals. So you've already established your priorities and your goals, but post-plan, you can go out and get outreach for the purpose of helping to get support to achieve the goals, maybe get input on how best to go about some of the actions that you've identified in your plan, and or as a way to kind of get some assistance, for completing the task that you've kind of laid out in the plan. So two places where I think stakeholder outreach can be beneficial. Any questions, thoughts, or additional thoughts on outreach?
I have a logistical question. Is that in your scope of work to do some outreach?
So what we've said, it was an optional thing. We wanted to talk to you all about it so that we could determine what's a reasonable scope we can take on in the next couple of months. So what I was hoping today is we'd sort of have a preliminary conversation on the most important stakeholder outreach that we'd like to see part of the strategic planning process, and then come back next month with kind of, okay, here's Sherilyn's proposal on what we could realistically do for the committee to make a final decision. And then what are things that could be done post strategic plan? That's not part of my contract right now, but that might be something you guys all do on your own, after the strategic plan is finalized.
Yes, I'm feeling that maybe this may be a byproduct of the preliminary conversations. Meaning that as we start determining what has been so far the folks that have been part of the larger conversation, beneficiaries from OCRF, stakeholders at the moment, and perhaps in comparison to what other funding sources are, that may ultimately lead us to say, hey, here's a blind spot. These are people who have been with us, likely to continue to be with us. Here's the reason why they're with us. And here's what that sort of input may be most beneficial in this very narrow aspect of that strategic plan. So to me, it seems that this may be something that comes up that would be better informed after the first portion of the planning.
Yeah, and that's why, I mentioned we're not going to make a decision about it today, but I wanted us to start thinking about the options. So then in September and or even October, if we decide in October to do something, there's a little bit of time there, but we're working in a window of probably, if you're going to do something, it's in that September to October is when we have to decide, so that we have time to do it and then come back. And I'm going to move to another slide in a minute and give you just what I have in mind for what might be some simple outreach, either now or after the plan, for you guys just to be having in the back of your minds. But before I do move to that slide, any other comments about the benefit that you might see for stakeholder outreach?
I personally think that's really important. I want to hear it. I'm anxious to hear what the commission thinks. I'm anxious to hear what some of the organizations we funded. I'm particularly anxious to compare what an organization like Oregon Hunters Association or Tryon Unlimited says compared to people of color or wild diversity. The kind of two different types of entities that we're supporting. I really want to get that feedback. So I think that for me, this is very important, Sherilyn, this part of it. And I'm happy that you're going to be, potentially able to do some of that in a meaningful way, that we can get some real feedback. So I think this is really important.
Okay, great. And yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I think, you're never going to be able to do as much outreach as you'd like, or there's good reason for doing outreach later as well. So I just want you to prioritize, what's most important now versus what stuff you might do post the plan finalization. So that makes sense to everybody. We'll probably be prioritizing. Okay. So the two, this is kind of just, again, something to put in your back pocket for when we come back to it. And I don't think, based on your group and how you've been talking about it, that this needs a lot of explanation. But if we were to go out and want to have more stakeholder input, this might be a way for us to prioritize audiences, right? But like Mauricio said, we want to have people of different connections to the OCRF involved in that input as well. So these are the kinds of things we'd likely be talking about in September and October if we were to decide to do some outreach as part of this plan, right? And we would modify probably how we got that outreach based on their connection to the OCRF right now. So again, something for you to have in your back pocket. So this was the slide I wanted to get to. So there's really two things that we've put as possible things we could do in the time that I'm going to be with you over the next couple of months. So one is interviews. So this could be one-on-one interviews, or it could be small group discussions, probably no more than 2 or 3 people though. Otherwise you can't really have a conversation where you're getting everybody's input the way you would like. So this would be perfect for an important business coalition partner. It could be important maybe for a commissioner or somebody in the legislature that's very critical to the OCRF work, ODFW as well. So interviews are great. We have a small budget of time that we could potentially go out and have some conversations. Usually what I would recommend is that I have those conversations so people can be open and upfront with all of their remarks. And I kind of pull together the themes of what the different audiences are kind of telling us, but happy to partner and do it with like Carl as the chair as well. So options for you guys to be thinking about. And then the other potential option is surveying. And I put that in here as an option because sometimes you can get a lot of input without a lot of effort. However, sometimes surveys can provide too much input in ways that are not valuable at the point that you're in your process. So you really want to think about that. And if you were to do it, maybe there's a very small priority group that you think getting some input via survey would be efficient and not overwhelming for where you are in the strategic planning process, knowing that you might want to utilize something like that post-strategic plan to engage with some of your stakeholder groups. So just the two areas that we could think about. Any comments, thoughts, or reaction to those options? There's been some chat as well. Oh, there we go. Not related to this.
Mark,
Thoughts? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think one of the things that strikes me, whether it's interviews or surveys, is we have just a really broad group of people that have an interest, I think, if you just look at our recipients. So it'll be important to make sure that array of interests is covered through the process. And some of the interest groups might respond better to interviews versus surveys, or I just think because OCRF is such a broad program, there could be a lot of people could have input to it. So a lot to gather.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's where we need to be careful that we don't scope it too large and we kind of become overwhelmed by the amount of input we're bringing into the process. So although we might want to hear from everybody at some point, we might prioritize certain groups. Because what you're thinking about right now are who are the groups that are going to help us set our strategy, right? They're going to have the most valuable input for setting the strategy and answering those questions. So other groups might be good at providing input at some other time for something else. So just something to think about, because you do have so many different people that are probably impacted in some way by your work, and or have been involved in different ways along the way. So again, this is why we want to just put it out there now so we can make sure we scope it and we're thinking strategically about what that scoping looks like. Maret.
I think your comments about having you do the interviews is a good idea. I've participated in this kind of work for the Forest Service across the country, and it's always nice to have a neutral person that can listen a little bit more clearly to what went well and what didn't go well. So I think that's a great point.
Great, thanks for that, Maret. Sarah.
Yeah, I think for me, your comment, Sherilyn, about scope and being careful with scope is important to me, that, you know, we only have this limited amount of time, and that maybe we also think together about what sort of public engagement might be something we want to do as part of a like communications planning effort or an outreach planning effort, which is a little bit separate from what we're doing here in the strategic plan. So I guess that's just something that we'll kind of all figure out together. But my hope is that we be very targeted with stakeholder outreach, that we manage expectations for what it means for us to be reaching out, and that we just err on the kind of streamlined stakeholder outreach side rather than doing some sort of full-blown survey effort for the strategic plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Jane.
Yeah, Jane and Mark.
I would say that we make some of these decisions after we see what we want to find out from people, whether it's an interview. I don't think we know that yet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jane. And so that may right there scope the effort when we come back and talk about it in September and October, which is, you know, I really think we need to know these 3 things and we could accomplish it with these activities. And we don't need to do any of this other kind of stuff. So something for us to be thinking about in September and October as we dive into the conversations more. Mark. Oop.
I wanted to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that we contact everybody, but that we make sure that we consider the array of types of people or constituents that are there, so that we don't only talk to the faculty at Oregon State University as one extreme, that we make sure we sort of have a representative sample of voices.
Yes. Other. Go ahead. Somebody was going to say something, I think. I spoke over them. Okay, maybe not. So I think these are all really good comments. I think what would be good for us to do is think about this as a potential thing we might want to do at some point early in the process. What I will do before the next meeting, and we'll talk about it at the end of the meeting so that we'll have some conversation during that meeting, is maybe some options for what it might look like. Maybe with some, what would we want to learn? Like you said, Jane, what would be the point of the conversation? If we're having an interview, what are the key questions we want to ask? And at that time, we can sort of either have some preliminary decisions, or we can say, let's talk about this again in October once we get into some of our other work. So I think we'll be finding a fine line on when we decide we need to do it versus now it's kind of too late to do it. Let's just move forward with our own sort of viewpoints on things. So I'll probably bring back like a preliminary scope. That's what I'm kind of suggesting in September to give you an idea of what it might look like. All right. Any other comments or questions about the stakeholder outreach? Perfect. So we made up a little time there. which is good because we can start to have a little conversation that I always think is a fun way to sort of reflect and figure out where we've been, which is really becomes kind of the foundation for understanding where we might want to go. And so we won't be doing a whole SWOT past analysis today because we don't have the time for that. But I thought we would start just with sort of a brainstorming conversation around what our strengths and weaknesses are. And I'm going to stop sharing that and switch to another place where I can capture the things that you're saying live, and you can see that I'm capturing them and see what other people have already suggested. So I'm going to switch over to share a different screen with you all. It also puts it in a format that you all might be able to sort of use in the future too, when we're sort of building on these conversations. So just as a starting point, if we want to focus on the strengths, and we touched, somebody mentioned, and I thought it was really important, is the uniqueness of the OCRF and the advisory committee, I think, are areas of strength. So I just wanted to remind you of all that comment that came up. So what are some of the things that you think we do well, our unique resources that we have to offer, the things that we would really want to do on, build on, etc. in a perfect world? And I'm going to type it for you all so that we can keep it going.
I'm happy to start, Sherilyn.
Thanks, Rishi.
I think that that we exist in the nexus between recreation and conservation and the opportunities that it represents.
Mm-hmm. Other strengths, and I'm not going to worry about the raise hands. I think you guys, it's a small enough group for the committee here. You can just throw them out when you have them.
I think one of our strengths is the committee itself. I've worked on a bunch of boards and I've never been with a board that's this good and gets along this well and is so diverse, and just the strength of connections and interests and expertise is amazing.
– Thank you for that.
I think
Mark.
OCRF addresses a significant funding gap in sort of state public funding.
Mm-hmm.
For lack of a better term, I used entrepreneurial last time, but just our nimbleness, our ability to not necessarily
Selling in public.
We have some flexibility in how we've done things, and that's a credit to the department. I think the department has given us that, and I want us to continue being able to be flexible.
I did want to put words in your mouth, Carl, but I was going to add sort of the ODFW partnership.
Yeah.
As the second part of your entrepreneurial comment.
I think we're pretty responsive. I think we've been responsive to needs of applicants, and I think we've been responsive to ODFW staff needs.
Great.
I have a couple of thoughts. I think maybe on the addresses a significant funding gap on ODFW, I think that could also be a weakness. As somebody else mentioned, I think Jane, that may also put us at some on a particular focus and how we sort of like become an additional arm, which is great, of course. That's the reason why we exist, but to some degree, it also creates certain limitations. And similarly to the entrepreneurial spirit. Go ahead.
How would you like to phrase that as a weakness? Then I'll just allow us to go back and forth when this happens.
I feel like it creates a tacit focus and a limitation in tacit, like it's not explicit.
Oh, so because of the funding, right?
Right. So like when as Jane said, like when we have requests from ODFW, it carry a different kind of weight than we get it elsewhere,
Okay,
which makes perfect sense, of course, but it also creates limitations.
yeah. Okay, continue. Sorry, Mauricio.
And then on the strengths, I want to add innovation. Like we do have the opportunity to think of innovative ways without some constraints that otherwise we would have.
Great. Other strengths or weaknesses, we can go back and forth.
I think we have to mention our coalition, the support that we've had in the past, and of course, part of this process is to figure out how to strengthen that.
Great.
I would jump on that too. I think we have strong support in the legislature for those that are familiar with OCRF. And then I'm not trying to blow smoke here, but we have a really good chair.
Thanks, Mark.
Can I put Carl as awesome there? Other strengths. I put that little caveat there, Mark, because I thought that was important for those that are familiar with the work that you do, right? There's probably a group that really aren't familiar, and that's an important thing to be thinking about. Especially when you talk about, you know, communication in the future and that kind of stuff. Other strengths, things you do well, things you want to do more of or build on.
I would add our really strong partnership with the Oregon Wildlife Foundation.
Right.
I think we have a pretty strong mission statement in terms of what our goals and desired outcomes are, centered around the conservation strategy, tied to recreation, as well as the other groups that have traditionally not been part of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Other strengths. I'm thinking of something, and I don't want to put words in your own mouth, but you get stuff done. You funded a lot of projects. I don't know if you see that as a strength or how you would phrase it any differently, but
Sherilyn, I think that's the outcome of all those strengths. I think we've been able to be effective because of everything that people have listed here.
But I think that's a good, the effectiveness of how you go about the work is the strength. Anything else?
I might have one for, are we doing just strengths and then weaknesses, or are we
You
like
can work and go back and forth.
I think that our time range from the RFP to when funds can be distributed might be a weakness. Like I would love, I don't know how, I understand the process stands in the way, but I'd love for us to be a little bit more timely to when we are responsive to the request of the project.
Other weaknesses, since we're over here and we've only put a few. So these are really things that get in your way. They limit you in some way. From
Well, Sherilyn, we've talked about it, and we even have it in our original documents, but we've talked a lot about monitoring. And I guess there's two kinds of monitoring there. You know, there's a monitoring to see if you've achieved your goal of restoring a species. That's one kind of monitoring. But the other is, are you actually getting the money on the ground? Are the projects getting done? I had a conversation with someone who had two different terms for those kinds of monitoring, but I can't remember what they were. There's the monitoring of just your ability to get the work done and you're putting the money in the ground, as opposed to whether it actually had an impact. It's harder to measure that impact. Like, is there more white-headed woodpeckers because of what we did? But you can find out if they actually did it. And we don't know that really. We haven't. I think that's something that's really important that we've got to figure out how to do, so that we don't keep doing the wrong things over and over again, you know. So I'd like to, I think that's part of your intention, to address that question. And if any of y'all, I've been trying to remember those two different types of
Implementation and
versus
effectiveness.
Effectiveness.
Yeah. What are they?
Implementation monitoring, did you
Yeah,
do
yeah,
what
yeah,
you
that's
said you're
it,
gonna
exactly.
do, and effectiveness, did it work?
Yeah, yeah,
Did you make a difference?
We don't have a secure long-term funding source.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's where I was going to.
Yeah, and I'll tag on to that, that just because of the money and legislative dollars we have so far, it is restrictive. It does seem like, you know, we have to spend it on drought, or we have to spend it on something else.
Perhaps also long-term staffing, you know, how we have to go through certain hoops just to have the support that Riva and Sarah and everybody there needs for this to happen.
I have a question for Riva and Sarah. Is, you know, sort of looking at the, sort of following up on Mauricio's, do you guys have the right software that you need to monitor the grants and everything that's coming in and out?
We don't at the moment, but it's coming. So with the Private Forest Accord Grant Program, we are doing a ton of scoping right now for a grant management system that we hope will not only streamline the front end to make the RFP process shorter, but will also allow us to track projects over time, be able to roll up accomplishments for reporting more simply, hopefully be a little bit easier for our applicants, as opposed to all the different ways we've had them submit in the past, everything from just Word documents to Google Forms to back to Word documents. So we're in cleanup mode there, but that system is pending. As far as staffing goes, I will also just say, you know, it's we were just celebrating the fact that the grant coordinator position has finally been made permanent through last legislative session. So that's a big win, and we'll get that position established this fall. And then I don't know if we've shared this with you before or not, but our contracts program also was approved for 2 additional contract, like procurement specialists. So they're staffing up too. I think these things are going to benefit OCRF. We're just probably about a year out from feeling any benefit from it.
We aren't well known. It's amazing how many people I talk to and I go, what's OCRF?
So you are or you are not?
We are not. As well as I think we should be known in terms of other grant programs that are out there.
I was going to build on that too. I think our communications are a weakness. It's really hard to get people's attention now. There's so many information sources, and who are you trying to communicate to? And I think we're going to really have to hone in on who and how to communicate.
And I think that's at the heart of it, Moritz. Not necessarily adding one more weakness, but I think once we get to that conversation, having that focus is going to allow us to much better deliver the message to those who I think are most important to have it.
Other strengths and or weaknesses. I like how you've been doing these so far. You know, strengths are really opportunities. So they may sort of translate into things we want to make as a priority or goal for the strategic plan. So if we have them, then we have an opportunity to talk about, can we do something and is it a priority?
I have one more for you, Sherilyn. Trust on the strengths. I think because of the work that we've been doing, we've been earning trust both internally and externally from those who find that we are a reliable source for funding or to funneling this funding, and also through those that we've funded and that have reaped the benefits of applying with us.
So is it, can I say earning trust from those who have applied? Or
We can even keep it simple. How
funded, or-
about earning internal and external trust? How's that?
Yeah, if you think back on our initial meetings when we had stakeholders talk to us, there was a lot of skepticism that anything positive would be done here, except for maybe a hunter safety program. And so I think we blew that out of the water. I think the other thing that's been a strength is the diversity of things that we've funded. It's extremely eccentric, which I love about it. I mean, little tiny grants that deal with species, diversity and inclusion work with underserved communities, just a broad range of things that is very eclectic, which might also be a weakness.
I think maybe another part of the weakness is that we haven't really followed up much with our grant applicants. It's been a little bit of a money's granted out, but then we haven't remained connected with them. And I just think there's an underutilized resource and asset there.
Mhm. We've got a good list over here. I don't want to zoom in too much and show two sides at once, or you won't be able to read anything. But this is kind of what we have for strengths here.
Well, I'll throw this out. It's kind of a nit for a negative, but it'd be nice if we met at least once a year in person and have a longer meeting to continue to build relationships and talk about longer term stuff, and rather than a 2-hour meeting or 2.5-hour meeting every month. At least from my
I'm
perspective.
glad you said that, Mark. No, I know. I was trying to figure out how to say that in a nice way. You don't want to be like, I mean, I think it's great that we are diverse because we're all across all corners of the state, but I think it is really important to be in person and have downtime together and connect with one another. I mean, I think that's how we got that green sticky on the other side of being a committed board. So I think more of that and continuing to relationship build on the board would all help us to be better at what we do. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Anything for either side of the board? And pop back over to the strengths.
I mean, I would say one strength we have, which we've sort of just started over the last little bit, but I love having the applicants who have finished projects or mid-project to come in and talk to us about their projects. I think that's really cool and not something that a lot of other funders are doing. So I like having a little bit of that one-on-one. And again, if we met in person, it would be great even to invite some of those applicants in the area or go on a little tour or something like that. Just wrap in a little bit more intimacy with them.
And these are
Continue
applicants
doing
that
that.
were awarded funds, right? Came and
Yes.
it wasn't part of the selection. Okay. Right, pop back over to the weakness side.
Yeah, you mentioned I think one of the things is we have not coordinated as well as we might have with other funding agencies like OWEB. I think if given an infinite time, you could come up with all kinds of ways that we could work together and leverage what they do and what we do. It's partly we just don't have the time, but that's a weakness that we have.
All right. I'm thinking of who I haven't heard from. Jane, anything that you're thinking that you haven't thrown out there yet as a strength or weakness?
No, I actually have just been listening. I agree with all of this, and I don't really have anything to add.
Great.
I guess I'll just add one more, that's maybe not a weakness, just a little hole for us right now is the, have we focused enough on the recreation side of OCRF, the R in OCRF?
So I have a question, don't write it down, Sherilyn, but just a question. Are you planning on asking some of our stakeholders, like, like Tim Gressett's on almost every meeting, OHA's on every meeting, some of our stakeholders that follow us pretty closely, the same kind of questions, what do they see as the strengths, what do they see as the weaknesses, so we can get their perspective, or is that part of the public process? Help me understand that.
Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. Obviously, we're going to have time for public comment at every meeting like we always do. So in fact, we could probably go there in a little while. And then that stakeholder outreach we talked about, earlier would be a place where you really overtly went out and asked for input on your strengths and weaknesses. That could be one of the kinds of things you want input on. And if you did, then you would figure out what's the best way to get a feeling for, I'm just thinking, applicants, right? The people that have applied in the past, what would we want to know from them? Might be, how they feel about the application process. So that would be a place where we could do the stakeholder outreach, but I would expect in the public comment section, people are free to share thoughts on anything they'd like.
Okay, great, because that sometimes, like the advisory committee, sometimes we're too close to it. And so it'd be good to have somebody from the outside that's looking in. So thanks.
And that's really that value of the stakeholder outreach, if we're able to do it, if we can scope it to be something that's valuable and manageable, that's where you can get that other voice. Because you're right, we're all so close to it. Others might have a different perspective.
I would add as a weakness to something Mark put up before, not as well known as we'd like to be, and more specifically, I'd say with the governor's office and partly reflected in our challenges sometimes to get advisory committee members appointed in a timely manner.
Yeah.
100%. That was what I was going to say. A major weakness. It was mentioned the recreation side. We have a designated recreation board member.
Right.
That position is unfilled, and we have an entire important region that's been unfilled for 2 years now. That's getting out of hand. We really need, and it may not be anything in our control other than to complain louder about it, but that's a real problem.
Yeah, that's a good one to add. Well, sorry, did you have something, Jane? You can.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, and this is actually echoing some of what's already been said, but that the unstable and earmarked funding has kept us from being able to prioritize according to our mission.
Math in public, typing in public, both hard. All right. Well, in the interest of time and knowing, like Carl said, we're going to revisit this. We won't belabor it and go over it all, but we want to have a chance for our committee members that are not here today to add to it. I also kind of consider this a living document, so additional things might come up along the way, and we'll come back to the list and we'll add them when they do. So with that, I think we should transfer it over to the closeout and public comments time that we need to save. Great input, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherilyn. Thanks for leading us in all of that. That was great. I just wanted to say before we open it up to public comment, and also for any members of the public that would like to comment, you can send me a message in the chat and I'll be happy to open it up for public comment in just a bit. I wanted to thank Tim Gresseth, who is on here with us today from Oregon Wildlife Foundation, for all of his help and support with getting this contract with Sherilyn going. He was very vital in having this happen, critical in having it happen so quickly, and using funds donated to OCRF to make it happen. So thank you to Tim. And thanks to Sherilyn for all of her work and leading us in this strategic planning effort. Let me see. Yeah. And I'm not seeing anything in the chat for public comment, but as Mark Labhart pointed out, if folks did want to help through public comment, they could add some additional strengths and weaknesses that they see to our organization. I'm not seeing any, so I think we're good with public comment for today's meeting. And with that, I can pass it to Carl for any closing comments, meeting wrap up, anything he'd like to close us out with for today.
Yeah, I just, once again, am so pleased with being on this committee. It's just been a great experience, and this just reiterates that. It's exciting to be talking about this stuff again, and I think we can move forward and be better than we have been. And this gives us, this little hiatus is not ideal, but we're turning it into something good. So I appreciate everybody's time in thinking about this stuff, and plan on coming back. And again, Sherilyn, it is just so nice working with you again. And our success, I think, in us being here, you were there at the very foundation and you helped build that. And I really appreciate it. And I think we're going to really have a nice process here. Thank you for the great work you've done for us.
Yeah, I have to say I was very excited to be contacted again to see if it might work out. I've missed all of you.
I think that's, does anybody else have any closing comments? I think we've got a lot done and got us all thinking in the direction we need to think. I just, again, the overarching thing is this funding piece. We've got to figure this out, and whether that's what role we can actually play in that or not, I think it's really, we've got to figure this out. I appreciate Tim also. I want to thank Tim Grethis for his involvement, and I think we can really do some really great things with the foundation in that realm of just moving us forward, but also the funding piece. So we're in a good place, and so I appreciate everybody's time today. And if there isn't any other comments, which I'm not seeing any, then we can adjourn and plan on getting back next month. All right, great. Reva, you and I in the next week or so should talk.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
A lot. See
Have
you
a great
later.
week, everybody.
Everyone.
Yeah.
I know.